Arsenal just broke this Diego Simeone Atletico Madrid side in a way not many can say they've done so before. And this match was a tactical goldmine from an Arsenal perspective, and I can't wait to get into all of that with you today. And I want to start with Arteta's once again slightly tweaked dynamics for the match and how that's indicative of this continuing, some would call it unpredictability, but indicative of how confident this team and manager are becoming in mixing up shapes, mixing up tempos and different levels of urgency, not just game by game, but within games themselves. I want to dive into the details as well of some of Arsenal's right-hand-sided intentions and how that was looking to manipulate the Atletico Madrid left-hand side in their 5-3-2 block you see here. How this includes, once again, Jurrien Timber being the index of so many of the good things Arsenal have upped this season. I'm talking about the speed of releases, the intent, the aggression, and I think the directness when the time is right. How Eze, Zubimendi and Gyokeres fit into all of this, and how Saka is looking unstoppable as he reaches more and more each game, each week, full fitness once again. But I spoke about mixing things up, and as I'm going through the different sequences we're going to talk about today, again, you see Arsenal in the final third and some of the flooding of the box I'm going to talk about. Arsenal were using this stack of three between the lines once more to very good effect. The makeup could change and it looked different almost every single time. But I want to stress and use this to stress one of the things I've been analysing of late, and I'm going to dedicate a video to later, and that's, as you see, the highlighted of the kind of corner that I've got down here, how Arsenal are abandoning these corners at times. Not all the times, but it's going to be a really key topic that I'm going to speak about today. I also want to talk about bounce passes and how this ties into the analysis of some of the sequences to the goals I'm going to speak about, specifically the second goal, Martinelli's first, and Gyokeres' first to make or to put us 3-0 up. How Zubimendi feels at the centre of this. Once again, the abundance of quality Myles Lewis-Skelly showed, and how it all interlinks into probably Viktor Gyökeres' most complete performance or display in an Arsenal shirt, and how encouraging that is. But welcome back to the Harvey Grayson YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once again. And I'm going to start with our, again, tweaked subtly, as Arteta is doing game by game, our intentions on the ball. And this was our 4-3-3 base that, of course, we didn't stay in very long, but this was our 4-3-3 base that Arteta began with, and the intentions behind it. You see how narrow I've got Eze here, and that was so deliberate for some of the manipulations on our right hand side, Atletico Madrid's left hand side, that we were trying to do. The Lewis-Skelly and Rice relationship was probably the most significant for me, because Lewis-Skelly coming in for Calafiori, who's played that marauding, constantly roaming role from left back. And you don't want, as I've said before, you don't want Lewis-Skelly constantly on the move. You want him stiller, receiving, shrugging off, driving and opening up the pitch that way. More dynamic on reception than all these off-ball movements. And the good thing was, this didn't keep Rice pinned high. He actually still had quite a global influence, I think, lower and higher up the pitch. And we're going to get into the intricacies and the nuances of that relationship with Lewis-Skelly. Martinelli, Gyokeres, Saka, you can see all with the arrows that I've got, the dynamics on the pitch. It's all pretty simple. And I want to launch into Arsenal's right-hand side, because in the first half, this was the real way that we got at this Atletico Madrid side. And I want to start with Timber, because it felt like the thrust came from him on the ball. You can see these solid white lines that I've got around Timber, and these were the passing options, if you will, that he could have. And I want to start with how we're setting up, because you see this red sort of rectangle that I've got, and with Eze and Gyokeres this narrow, it promoted the left back Hancho, I think it is, for Atletico Madrid to be 1v1 with Saka, but this acre of space in the half space for Arsenal to exploit. That could be a Timber ball into Saka, starting a give and go, where you can see this green dotted arrow is Timber here, and how dynamic Timber was, and again, how speedily he initiated some of these combinations and made his decisions on the pitch was really nice to see. But that could also be a Timber pass into Zubimendi, moving into this kind of cover shadow here on these diagonals, or likewise Eberechi Eze. And again, it's about how we manipulated this half space, because if Timber plays that ball into Eze here, and Eze is actually dropping out the block, and he was followed by Koke again in this 5-3-2 for Atletico Madrid, then Saka is suddenly off the shoulder of Hancho running in behind. And I think the place where Atletico got it wrong and we got it really right was Gonzalez in this kind of left mid role, always jumping onto Timber and stretching. You see how this stretches the space even more. So if Eze is narrow and Koke is following him, if Gyokeres is occupying the two centre-backs, then Timber and Saka as a duo have an absolute field day in this half space. So let's move over to how this progressed into the final third, because I want to tie this into how Arsenal are increasingly flooding the box in different ways, because Saka, we're talking about abandoning not width, but the corners when the time is right. If Saka's making that sort of dart inside, Timber can hit him with a ball, or as we saw, he can sort of duck and drive himself on the outside. And when we're trying to slip Saka in or Timber in himself in the half space, or find Zubimendi in that aggressive positioning that he really loves to give us in the final third, more on that later, and sort of how Arteta is platforming Zubimendi to tap into his really clever and incisive slips and clips and final third game that, we spoke about a lot in the scouting reports of Zubimendi, and I think people are only really starting to understand what he can give us here now. That might be Eze again moving at these diagonals, but what I wanted to talk about is how, Timber, as we saw, he put in a couple of balls himself, but if we got Saka to the byline driving, how we're flooding the box in different ways. Suddenly, Gyokeres and Martinelli actually were making those sort of striker darts towards the 6-yard box and the near post, and you had Rice and Eze on the edge of the box, and this is such a nice sort of duo for these edge of the box drops. We know how sort of skillful Rice is when he's whipping the ball and with the inside of his foot sort of whipping it towards the far corner. Eze on the edge of these on the edge of the box for these drops as well has scored so many goals across his career, and that's a really profitable margin. And it looks as though our Arsenal and Arteta are being really intentional with how we're flooding the box. We're all going at once when we feel like we've got a real advantage. And the left-back joining in has been a real thing as well. Not sitting in kind of a more deliberate rest defence with these players here, but Lewis-Skelly, as Calafiori was, has really been, strutting his stuff, trying to get into the box as well. That might be sort of hovering in the kind of soft zone that you would have here in the 6-yard box. That might be going wide, or that might be sitting here. But again, Arsenal on the right-hand side, this is how we were manipulating the Atletico Madrid, certainly in the first half, their defence and their left-hand side, and we should have probably been a goal or maybe 2 goals up because of that. But we were mixing things up. We saw the sort of, let's go back to the 4-3-3 base that we saw in the first half, and how that could move Myles, Lewis-Skelly inside, and Timber could sort of be either side of Zubimendi in this 2-3 base, with Rice a little bit higher, Eze and Gyokeres sort of twinning up and creating this 2-3-5. But as we're being nice and unpredictable, that stack that we've been seeing between the lines is a sort of stack of 3 here that, again, I want to really commit a video to, and how this is helping the kind of timed narrowness and clustering of Arsenal's play when the time is right. But this is just one of the makeups that we saw, because this really worked against Fulham as well. Rice dropping into the left centre-back zone and pinging those switches. That might be to Saka sometimes, but if he is in this 3, like we've done, that could be Timber. Importantly here, Timber arriving into these wide zones. Not starting with this stretchy occupation, but allowing players to arrive into those zones. Again, Hanchko has sort of pinched in to follow Saka, and that could leave Saka to be sort of more on the shoulder on the last line here, and again abandoning those corners. And if we can get someone else on the ball, like a Zubimendi for example, how if we just clear the drawings here, how Saka starting in these narrow roles, getting the left back into uncomfortable positions again. I think actually yesterday was one of the most, because I never want to overstate how much Gyokeres is sort of occupying the centre-backs, even though that is a tangible and real thing. But yesterday, he really was, and Atletico Madrid were staying really narrow with their two centre-backs on Gyokeres, and that created the opportunities. Maybe Eze comes deep and Saka spears in, again through the half space, starting narrow. But this cluster of three we were using more and more and more. And it's part of this deliberate effort from Arsenal to occupy the centre more. Eze, again, is sort of in this lower touch, backboardy role that he's trying to... We're trying to find angles into him. I mean, let's sort of flip the dynamics here, because often it was this kind of stack. Timber going into that higher pocket. Saka staying wide. But Eze, again, is trying to sort of find advantages for these little balls through to him. And he's in this lower touch, almost backboardy role that, you know, you want Eze to be a much higher sort of touch role than this. And I would say he's still doing well, because he's someone who can just have a low touch, high impact role. But I want him to be getting on the ball more, because we've seen him, certainly when we set this kind of triangle, if we set the kind of vector path here, if we see this kind of triangle, how Eze coming a little bit lower on this right-hand side, how incisive he's being with movements off the shoulder, how he's looking to hit Gyokeres immediately. I want to still see more and that more. I don't think it's too much of a worry yet, because it's part of sort of a larger kind of stack between the lines that Arteta himself is trying to find. But I want to bring this on now, because Eze in this lower touch role, often he's playing at first touches, he's bouncing and he's releasing, and how the importance of the bounce pass was felt in different ways against Atletico Madrid. Because normally, where Saka is right now on the screen, we've seen the right centre mid, whether that's Nwaneri, Ødegaard, Merino for Arsenal, dropping from high to low, changing their heights, playing a first-time bounce into Zubimendi, who gets the ball from them and plays a first-timer himself, either over to sort of your out ball and your right winger. But here, it was Timber, and it was Saka who was doing a lot of the dropping and sort of pinning more centrally before finding Zubimendi. And I think that showed how we can still create this almost automatism without Martin Ødegaard. It was Saliba wrapping it through the lines, Saka changing his heights, because Saka's so strong. We know when this gets all congested, Saka is so strong, and we saw him actually often not bouncing it to Zubimendi, but holding off, shrugging, and finding Timber as this out ball. But if we adjust this once more, Zubimendi, this is a really nice, I think, just something to look out for in the future with this kind of relationship Saka and Timber are developing. With Saka pinned up the backside, firing it into Zubimendi, who can either release Timber or, as we saw yesterday, free Gyokeres, who's making those arcing runs into the channel. And I think Gyokeres, in how he was accessed yesterday, is just, things are just looking a bit slicker. I don't want to overstate them, but he's feeling more integrated, I think, into our sequences, and we're getting more used to as well how we have to bring in someone who's left to hover along this last line more and more and more. But this is more kind of a prelude with Zubimendi and how we can manipulate presses now to an increasing degree in the middle of the pitch. Before, we've seen Arsenal, certainly last season, rushing the ball again into the final third. But Zubimendi, and with Rice as well, and with Lewis-Skelly all close, with Eze dropping and with Saka dropping, but the balance of the movements as well, with Timber going the other way, with Gyokeres stretching the other way. There's a kind of, I would like to describe it against Atletico, a kind of in and outness to this Arsenal team, where we can bounce it into someone, they can bounce it back out, and someone's also stretching behind. There's a real balance to the movements, and how this is allowing us to wait for advantages to crop up in the middle third and bait presses onto us a little bit more. You would have heard me speak about this a lot, but I want to speak about this in relation to the Atletico game itself, because this is the Martinelli goal, and the ball starts with Zubimendi. Again, Saka in this pinching position, I think, in this higher pocket. Gyokeres is close, so again, we have that arcing run, as we do with Timber, making that sort of arrival into the corners, but not starting with someone in this territory out there, where it's interesting, this development, because you want to stretch teams, but sometimes you don't want to harbour your possession or sort of just force it out wide. But Zubimendi and Saka play this bounce, okay, and it comes back to Zubimendi, and then all of a sudden it's about him doing the same. We're talking about these in and out passes and movements. Him doing the same with Lewis-Skelly, who comes into this position here. As Zubimendi passes it into Lewis-Skelly, everything gets really tight. As you'll see, if you watch it back, this is what I'm trying to do, is on this sort of tactics board, just exactly what you've seen on the pitch. And as Lewis-Skelly comes in, again, you can watch this for the Martinelli goal and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Lewis-Skelly receives it here, and this player who I'm sort of monitoring here is Gallagher, and he's actually watching the Rice sort of underlap here, so he's not getting too tight to Lewis-Skelly, and that obviously allowed Lewis-Skelly to break open the play, carry with the ball. And if you watch Martinelli's movement, this felt like the Martinelli of old, and it goes two ways, because how dynamic this out to in run from Martinelli is here, how he just puts the burners on and takes, I think it was either Llorente or Simeone, completely out of the game, is tremendous. Lewis-Skelly obviously slips him in and Martinelli does his thing, but that hunger in the runs is what Martinelli, and that unpredictability in the movements is where he comes alive. Again, he's being allowed more and more, it feels, to slip on blind sides in between fullback and centre-back instead of being just held on the touchline. And this sequence that we see here, I think, is testament to so many things that Arsenal are doing, because how many times have I said on this channel that it's about how you arrive in the final third with momentum sometimes, because if you're just rushing into the final third, often going down the sides, you're essentially rushing into a brick wall, and that's certainly the case with an Atletico Madrid side who are trying to be this 5-3-2 off the ball, with Llorente actually dropping into right centre-back here and Simeone into right wing-back. You're running into a back wall. So it's about how can you generate advantages a little higher up the pitch where you can create that space to arrive into. And with Martinelli, if that's the case and you can get him sprinting, then, well, that's a brilliant thing. And talking about accessing Martinelli in this space behind, let's talk about the Gyokeres first goal, because Zubimendi again is doing this into-out play, and you can see the benefits of Eze in this high and central role. Again, we have a very, very similar kind of structure, with Timber being able to arrive from right back, Saka speeding up with momentum inside, and we have this stack of three with Saka, Eze and Rice this time between the lines. Zubimendi bounces in and out with Eze, and the way Arteta spoke about Eze and Myles Lewis-Skelly after the game against Atletico was how they can attract players. Eze does just that. These guys get close to him, he bounces it back out to Zubimendi, who gets pressed and finds Lewis-Skelly. And Lewis-Skelly, it's exactly the same. Lewis-Skelly gets pressed and he finds Zubimendi, he makes that give and go with Zubimendi, who's going in, out, side to side, and there's a real balance to our movements. And then suddenly, again, you've got Martinelli going in behind, and it frees up Zubimendi in this kind of inside pocket. If you can just get it more match-like here, in this kind of inside pocket, Martinelli again makes that really uncontrollable, unpredictable run. Zubimendi with his left foot, again, I think it's been, I've said it all the time, haven't I? How Rice and Zubimendi, it's so nice to see them shifting sides on the pitch. Here they're doubling up actually in the half space as Zubimendi clips Martinelli in behind with this ball. And that access to I'm not just speaking about Martinelli broadly here, but that access to our left-hand side that Zubimendi gives us feels like certainly a real additive to our play, and something we've lacked with that central number 6 and sort of the cuteness that Zubimendi can show, I think, in these inside pockets on the left-hand side is really going to tell if he can be allowed to express himself more and more. And I spoke about, didn't I, how Arteta is allowing Zubimendi to essentially be the kind of player he is for Spain, and the one I was speaking so highly of, and saying This guy isn't he's a different breed of six, as I've said so often. He's a mover, and he wants to add things in the final third. And I've spoken about that stack, obviously, between the lines. This is taking it even further. Our rest defence in this sequence, and this is for a Gyokeres chance, is literally Timber, Saliba and Gabriel. Rice has spilled left, Zubimendi is overloading, but really high up too. And it's about picking those right moments. How many times have I said about that calculated risk? This was the time Arsenal were really upping the urgency. And Zubimendi smelt an advantage. So, as people got close, Lewis-Skelly made that diagonal dart. Zubimendi smelt the advantage, like I said. Gabriel plays this cutter into him, and it's that flick up from Zubimendi, isn't it? And poke, almost, through to Gyokeres, making that movement. And I think the movement from Gyokeres here, and how cottoned on he was to it, was the most important thing. Like I said, it's probably the best all-round game from Gyokeres. There was a simplicity, I think, in some of his hold-up play, and sometimes I think he needs to streamline and simplify some of his intentions. I think sometimes he's so intent on fighting the centre-back, because it is always such a battle, that he loses focus of his first touch or his first pass, or sometimes it's the other way around. He's thinking about, how can I turn this situation into a creative one? How can I slip someone in? How can I secure my first touch? And he actually loses track of the battle at hand. But I think he did that against Atletico much, much better, if that makes sense. Again, I've got a video on Gyokeres and assessing his time at Arsenal so far coming up. But this movement here, as Zubimendi plays him in, and Oblak obviously came out and sort of suppressed the effort. But it was really, really positive, because I think certainly against Fulham this goes for too. We were finding a way to access Gyokeres off the last shoulder, and he wasn't having sort of just 2-3 touches a half. We were finding a really sustainable way of slipping him in, and of course sometimes he has to be better in these final actions, but overall it's a really, really positive thing. And like I was saying, he did occupy, I think, the Atletico centre-backs. I think this was one of those games where you can use that to really good effect to emphasise some of the spaces, again, if we go back to the right-hand side, that Saka would have to peel off into, with him and Eze staying so narrow as they did, manipulating this whole Atletico Madrid block. But we've gone through Arsenal's right-hand side intentions and how that relationship between Timber and Saka is developing, which I think is really nice to see, especially if White is still building his fitness. Timber is adding again, not necessarily the quality, there's still sort of inconsistencies, but by just adding reps and expansiveness, he's improving so much in his game going forward, and he's tapping into so many of the sort of skill sets that he's kept holstered. I've spoken before how I want to explore this further, how without an Ødegaard, a sort of another high-touch interior on this right-hand side, how Timber, with more of the ball, you're going to see more of these ducks and drives and these different kind of creative weapons that he sees. He's not just a foil, a decoy run through the half space. He's now moving with a hunger to get the ball from Zubimendi or Eze or Saka through here. We've spoken about, again, the stack between the lines, and this was sort of composed, I think, in so many different ways. If we get rid of the drawings here, we saw Zubimendi in this space, Rice in the 6, Lewis-Skelly in sort of this 2-3, either side of the number 6. Again, we saw so many different ways to create this. Zubimendi is not just added. He's not just a balance sort of when he moves high. He's really additive too. And I'm just really liking how deliberate we are in creating this stack between the lines, how we're looking to genuinely slip balls into them where someone can be a backboard and bounce into a releaser, and then from there we can slip in Gyokeres in these fast, staggered first touch sequences. We've spoken about how we're playing with presses more in the middle of the pitch, and how you can see that not just in the Martinelli goal and some of the qualities between a Zubimendi and a Lewis-Skelly, and how that's helping a Gyokeres too. And I think as well, just to finish this video talking about Lewis-Skelly, there's never been a question of, or it's never been the Calafiorian Lewis-Skelly debate. It's never been a question of quality. It's just what we're looking to do with the role. And if Zubimendi and Rice are in that deeper pair where, of course, they have lots of freedom and they can shift around, but you're asking Calafiori to be almost that kind of connector into the final third with all these marauding movements. That's not a role you want Lewis-Skelly in, but when Lewis-Skelly is stiller and he can shrug off like he did before he set up Martinelli and drive and open up that way, and we have a balance of movements like we have elsewhere, not just the same sort of Rice pinning high, Lewis-Skelly sitting in more of a stricter double pivot with, you know, better dynamics around it. You can begin, as we are, you can subtly change and tweak these dynamics game on game. And that's where that unpredictability tag is coming back to Arsenal. It's something Arteta has always wanted, but something we're really getting now. And look, we blew away Atletico Madrid in a way that laid down a marker in a statement. You know, this Diego Simeone team came to not just frustrate, but to have their moments on the counter-attack as well. And, well, we laid down a marker to Europe, and I'm just enjoying watching this Arsenal team so much at the moment. But that's all we've got time for today. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Sorry if the audio is a bit different. I basically don't have a mic just for this video. It'll be back in the next one, but I just wanted to get something out really quickly for you guys. I was at work last night, so I couldn't watch the video and I didn't have time to do sort of my normal layout for a full breakdown. I've got my chair in the way, like I know now. But I wanted to get something out for you. I will catch you, though, don't worry, very shortly. This was another really positive result for Arsenal. 3 out of 3 in the Champions League now. And, yeah, I'll catch you very shortly. See you later.